Good job. Thanks, President.
I was like, I saw Brian. I'm stepping in now.
I'm telling you why.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Looks like you're back to your seat. You're ready, so I'm going to put it right to you, Mr. Bass.
Ready to go? Wonderful. So, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Burns, thank you so much for having us here today. I'm joined by our lead senior director for middle school programs, Dr. Kenji Bass, and I'd like to acknowledge two wonderful professionals that are to his right, Christina Zakowski and Tina Galucci, who make up the middle school mathematics team. They have been instrumental in the leadership of this effort that's been going on behind the scenes and in some part very visible to the community over the last 12 months. But it's been a very cross-departmental system-wide approach, and we'll highlight and champion other champions that have been a part of this work that are members of other departments throughout the course of the presentation. As we go through the deck, just to give you some insight on how we'll tell our story today, we've done a lot of work throughout this school year and started with your leadership last year with some policy implementation, and we'll start there. We'll talk about some of our lessons learned, the practices that we should be carrying forward for future adoptions. As you know, this is the second major adoption that our school system has undergone since last year, where we started with grades 3 and grade 6 with EL education and Math 1 with the MVP process. And we'll talk about what our solution is at the end of our presentation today. So just talking about at a very high level what was accomplished. As you know, Policy 3200 was revised mid-year last year. That I think was really appropriate in terms of, and I want to thank you for setting very clear guidance on the role of core instructional resources versus supplemental resources. I think the language within this policy, I believe, along with my staff, holds very true the language that's evident within our strategic plan to make sure that the content within our curriculum is culturally responsive, that it represents the diversity of our district, and it's empowering students to attain grade level standards and has the appropriate scaffolds to do so. So again, from a governance perspective, I want to thank you very much for that insight. For our schools, it also sets very clear expectations on implementation when we purchase a comprehensive course solution. As we know, we expect our schools to be utilizing these new resources after a significant financial investment, to be using them almost every single day in their classrooms. So it's important that we bring them to the table in the selection process. Another key, very critical aspect of this work is that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so as we have an opportunity to review the total cost of ownership with our models, we're not just looking at the vendor costs to implement, but we also have internal costs that it's important for us to outline and be balanced as we mobilize a lot of resources, sometimes complete positions, to be focused on the support and the services to our schools to ensure that they are successful with implementation beyond what we may buy for them. I think that's a really important piece that we have to continue to listen to our stakeholders and be responsive to those needs. Similar to last year, we've taken a multi-phased approach that I'll take you through in a detailed manner in just a minute. But I feel really confident that across all stakeholders, when you look at the data that's in our appendix that we've shared with all of you, that I really feel good that we have put ourselves in a situation to have the best solution for our teachers, for our students, and for our parents to have a middle school mathematics experience that is absolutely first class. And we're excited to talk to you about that today. Upon the onset of our presentation, I talked about having some key instrumental academics champions. This by no means is solely an academics approach to the work. Data research and accountability has been tied to our hip to ensure that we are learning from them with their evaluation and implementation practices, not just from the selection aspect of our curriculum, but also all the way through implementation. Mr. Fletcher, you used in a previous board meeting that concern of sometimes not getting across the last 2 to 3 yards. And this is really, really important that the selection of what our solution is really that's 50% of the work. Carrying that through to ensure that our students, our teachers, and our community knows how to get support, but utilize the curriculum is really key, and data research and accountability has been very helpful with that process. We've learned a lot in partnering with finance and procurement to not only ensure that we are looking at all aspects of total cost of ownership, but as the largest school system in this state and the 15th largest in the country, we've leveraged our size to drive down the costs of our curriculum resources, not just what we've done in the past, but with this particular particular solution as well, we've put ourselves in a really good position to drive down costs and be responsible with taxpayer dollars, and that could not have been done without the help of finance and procurement. We know in listening to parents that they want their children, as well as we want our students to have access to resources, both in a print and a digital format. And we are going to be able to execute on that work, but in order for any type of curriculum to interact with our existing technology infrastructure, they have to be at the forefront of this work to ensure that the interoperability of how all of those things speak with one another is absolutely seamless and a non-negotiable in this process. And I want to thank Marlo and her team for really on the front end of this work of holding high standards and ensuring that when we have an opportunity to execute, that the curriculum vendors or partners, I'd like to say, have a real clear understanding of what their expectations are from us with making sure those things interact. Our communications department has been really critical about ensuring that the community is well aware of what we're doing all along throughout this process, but also ensuring that through our internal stakeholders, whether it's through our intranet, our social media, that we're constantly highlighting this work to elevate the level of transparency, because if we're selecting something that people ultimately don't want or don't want to use or confused about it, in the end that hurts kids. And so having communications, Michael and the team and Lisa and Tim have been really critical. And academics there is not just the academics department. That includes special education, student support services. That's really the academic advancement team. The area superintendents, the special assistants have all been an instrumental part of this process. So as we have an opportunity to spend a little bit of time understanding the process, again, we've outlined this in a form that's, I think, easy to understand for the community, where on the left-hand side of this framework, it tells you all of the different stakeholders who have been involved in this journey that's taken almost 12 months for a middle school math adoption. It also outlines the different utilities that we look for when we're evaluating a curriculum. It's not just our standards alignment. We want to make sure that this aligns to the goals of our strategic plan and is relevant not just this year, but in the next 5 years. We want to know from a usability standpoint that people feel comfortable when they're interacting with the curriculum, whether it's in print or digital, that they feel hungry to go back to it, that they see themselves in the curriculum, that the problems are relevant. So usability is really critical. We talked a little bit already about the technology interoperability. Implementation and support, again, it's not about just putting a shelf or a solution on the shelf and asking teachers to go use it. This solution has put us in a position, because of costs, to really invest in our teachers and in our school leaders from a professional development standpoint, as well as our central office folks across all departments. So implementation and support is really critical that we look at that as well, in addition to the total cost of ownership. And along the bottom there, we have multiple phases that we go through as a collective system that we'll talk about in a minute in terms of what particular pieces of those utilities that we look at and what stakeholders do we involve along periods of time. It starts off by issuing an RFP. Very simple. We realized, based upon your blessing 2.5 years ago when we issued the quality review of our curriculum, that middle school mathematics was a priority area that we needed to target and provide a comprehensive solution. So we've been very slow and methodical in terms of understanding, now that we knew what our need was, how do we go about approaching it. The RFP was the first place where we knew what were some of the partners that were interested in doing business with Wake County. We had a lot of respondents to that. It's our job, before we begin selecting community members and teachers to become a part of this process, that we narrow down that focus from maybe a dozen respondents to 2 or 3 that we have a high level of confidence in, that all of those solutions are standards aligned and have the 4 Cs in our strategic plan embedded throughout the entire curriculum. I feel really confident that over the last 2.5 years that members of all of our central offices departments have been developed on a tool called the IMET. It's an instructional materials evaluation tool. It is the national standard on curriculum evaluation for standards alignment. And from those respondents, we were able to successfully narrow our choices down to 2 or 3 possibilities before flipping the process to being more public facing, which was the next phase. We have community input sessions, as you know, we've highlighted, and many of you have attended, and I appreciate that very much. It sends a strong message when board members are attending curriculum adoption sessions sessions in the evenings at our schools. We had 3 sessions. We've engaged about 14% of our middle school math teachers attended those sessions. We have about 500 middle school math teachers in our school system. When you look at the number of principals that showed up, as well as those that have already piloted some of these solutions, we have about a third of our middle school middle school principals that were a part of this process. And we also had the engagement and attendance of parents and different community members. This is an area that I'd like to target to improve upon. We've really highlighted through social media and other areas of communication how to engage the community to be a part of this process. But I think in the future we can do better in terms of a turnout. But I'm really happy that we make this a public process, and that data gets put into the decision-making process. So it really does count and matter in terms of what we decide. From that particular area, it comes back to the central office place where we have an opportunity to bring in those 2 to 3 final recommendation, those partners that could be possible partners with us, and we have them really take us through a lesson. So we see this curriculum in the eyes of a student. It's one thing to evaluate it from a technical aspect or from the teacher lens, but we were really interested in seeing what this looks like through the lens of a student. So we played the role of student, and they took us as they were teaching us through the process. So we understood what their expectations were as curriculum writers in terms of what this looked like. It also provided us an opportunity to ask questions of our partners or possible partners around what the logistics were for implementation, for support, what it looked like in our technology infrastructure, what it looked like in print, what we would need to mobilize that. So we had some really good internal conversations of what we could execute and what we couldn't, and that helped really refine our feedback as another key point in the decision-making process. And we did that in very, very early March. But it helped to elevate the strengths and the challenges and got rid of the marketing and sales pitch and really got down deep and dirty in terms of this is what our students need and these are the types of students that we have in our school system. What does the curriculum look like through that lens? From that point, we then began field testing over just about a 3.5-week period. We engaged middle school math teachers across all 8 of our geographic areas in our school system, and they had an opportunity to field test one of the 3 possible solutions to not only get a teacher feedback, an element of feedback for what this looks like in practice from our own teachers, but also elevated the student voice in this process because we really wanted to ask them a lot of questions. Were students engaged when you were utilizing this curriculum, and what did that look like? So that's a really key aspect of this work, and we did that for the last week of February into mid-March. All of those data points then come into the final set of this process, which is really us doing our due diligence. We have multiple data points from the IMET tool, the community input sessions, the field testing. We wanted to make sure that we take all of that data, align it to the total cost of ownership, and make sure that we're making the best choice possible, not just for our school system today, but what will this commitment look like over the next 5 years, and are we ready for that? And what do we have all of the resources aligned, and can we put them in alignment to make sure that this is a successful implementation? So that's really the culminating activity, the final phase, and it's also to help ensure that there's a strong level of transparency. And you can see in your appendix what that data was that our stakeholders were looking at and grappling with when they had an opportunity to digest these different areas of our curriculum strategy. At a very high level, we've learned a lot about implementing curriculum in our school system across multiple schools for the past 2 years. I wanted to take a point of privilege, if I can, to highlight our strategy, because I think it's really important that all of our stakeholders know, one, how appreciative we are of them getting plugged in, because it wouldn't happen. The success of our curriculum implementation over last year would not have happened without a really strong strategy, but most importantly, these multiple stakeholder groups participating in that strategy and providing us really important feedback. You may have heard, and I'm sure you have, in previous presentations at the board, when we are implementing our MTSS framework across our school system, we're asking school principals and school leaders with teachers to implement a team-based problem-solving approach called TIPS. We've modeled our curriculum strategy after the same strategy we're asking all of our 10,000 teachers to implement when they're talking about schools, to keep it simple, to ensure that we know what our needs are, that we're selecting criteria and materials that are aligned to those needs, and that we're really keen on how we are actually implementing and utilizing the TIPS process throughout each of those three phases. Again, the success of the EL education implementation and the MVP implementation over the last 12 months is a result of this particular strategy. And this highlights in each of those particular phases that I think are really simple and easy to understand, that we have very clear goals and activities, and we continue to refine these goals and activities based upon feedback that we're getting from the field and our teachers. It is these particular strategies and activities that has allowed our school system to drive down costs. A perfect example of that is when you look at in element B in the center, determining the quality of OERs. It's an open educational resource. Well, we've changed the market. Last year, when we went through a procurement process, typically OERs that are in the free public domain don't respond to RFPs because they're free and in the public domain. And so as a result of our curriculum strategy and knowing that responding to the proposal and knowing how companies are going to need to support us beyond just the content, but also from a professional development standpoint, all of the OER solutions that we are looking at responded to our RFP for the first time this year when they weren't a part of that last year. So we're really changing the marketplace based upon quality and based upon clear expectations, and I'm really proud of that in our team to know that our school system has really taken, I think, a pioneer national leader type approach in this work. Communications are really critical, and I've highlighted that, at least I hope to have tried to have highlighted that throughout the entire curriculum strategy process. But it's not just central to what we do internally in our system, but also ensuring that the community knows what all of their opportunities are to get plugged in. But once we make this selection, how do they have the opportunity to get plugged into support for their children and for their students? And so we've outlined really key communication points throughout each of those three arms of the comprehensive strategy. But also those communications are really critical in identifying the data points and the metrics that we want to utilize to drive this decision-making process, so we're not making a decision blindly. That we're really key on what all of those areas or utilities are before we make a final decision. Again, all in the spirit of being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And I know that's going to be an important theme of the day, right? So just to elevate our strategy and put some images behind it, when we're identifying our needs, again, this journey started 2.5 years ago. At your help and with your blessing to allow us to do a quality review of our curriculum to elevate what were our biggest areas of need that we needed to provide a comprehensive solution. We've done that not just by looking at one data set, but when we think about what that quality review looked like, it started with listening to our teachers. It wasn't just seeing what they had access to and taking an inventory of our curriculum and looking at the quality of that. It was doing teacher focus groups with over 250 teachers. It was taking over 1,000 samples of student work. And what we've recognized when we were looking at identifying the needs of our districts is that in every classroom that we visited, every classroom, I say that confidently, students always did what they were asked to do. We just weren't always asking them to do the right things. And it was at no fault of the teacher, and many times the resources that they had access to were simply not aligned to our strategic plan or our standards. And so that is one of the reasons why today I think is very celebratory in nature, that we have been responsive to listening to our teachers, the feedback from our teachers while listening to them, as well as our students, and we're getting ready to provide them a solution in a timely manner to have a really successful start of the 18-19 school year. The selection process, again, in phase 2, has taken 12 months to get where we are today. It's been slow, methodical, but very strategic and intentional, and I'm really proud of my team as well as the entire system in that journey of bringing it all together, and the community members that have been a part and involved. Again, it's only 50% of the work, right? So it gets really serious that once we make the decision of how are we going to support our teachers and our school leaders and our coaches with the implementation of these new resources. And so we are just about to embark upon phase C, but I feel really good about the lessons that we've learned over the last 12 months with EL education and MVP, that we are really hitting the ground running, and we're able to accelerate this work. We've gone slow to go fast, but we're in the fast stage now, which is really something that I think is exciting. For this middle school procurement, we are not just looking at grade 6. we are going to tackle aggressively but successfully providing these resources to all of our grade 6, 7, 8, 6+, and 7+ teachers between May and July. And the professional development, all of those things that go along with it. And again, that encompasses about 500 teachers in our district and about 39 principals, but we are well positioned based upon the lessons learned to do that well. And I'm really...
applaud now?
I'm sorry.
Shall we applaud now?
Yeah, sure. Anytime you like.
Anytime, we'll take
I appreciate it. I'm going to use some wait time to let that process. That's good.
Well, notice that between May and July takes care of multi-track schools too.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. And so I have Dr. Bass here who's going to talk to you about what will our solution be. God bless you.
Can I just quickly ask on that May to July, will our teachers who are normally out on contract be compensated for any work that's done during that time? Because May to July is usually off contract.
We have successfully been able to provide dates where they are on contract. In any instance where we have situations where teachers are off contract, they need to be compensated.
Yes.
But we are setting up an opportunity for all of them to be on contract. That's for all calendars. So I feel really good about that. But we know that everybody's not in position to be hired. At these particular times, hiring happens all throughout the year, and so we have to offer opportunities throughout the course of the summer and into the school year. It's not just these first 2 days of PD. There'll be back-to-back 2 days, but we will have ongoing, I believe it's 5 days of professional development for all of these teachers over the course of the next 365 days. That's an important piece and a lesson that we've learned when talking to other districts who have implemented the same curriculum. We really wanted to learn from those target areas as well. Dr. Bass?
All right, thank you, Brian. He's left me with the opportunity. He wrapped the gift. Now I get to unwrap it and tell you which solution we chose. So we are moving forward with Open Up Resources. And before we hit the highlights, I do want to recognize that in an effort to be more transparent, in the appendix, we gave you a summary of some of the raw data that support the decision that we made or that we landed on to go with Open Up Resources. First and foremost, you might have recognized when you were going through the appendix that in the terms of navigation, content, and standards, Open Up Resources outpaced the other two resources in every category except for one. And in that one category, it was only 1/10 of a point away from leading in that category. So that told us that from our stakeholders, both from the teachers who field tested it, the community members who got a chance to experience it that evening at one of the local high schools, and then the central services leaders or workers who got a chance to deep dive, they all thought that Open Up would outpace the other two resources in terms of viability. Also, we wanted to step outside of just the community stakeholders, and we wanted to get an objective view as well from a national organization. So you also saw in your appendix that some Ed Reports, a report from Ed Reports, which is an independent company whose job is to essentially vet all of the curriculum resources that are available and then assess them. And what we saw there is that Open Up had the highest score of the other resources in which they vetted. In terms of focus and coherence, perfect score in all grades, 6 through 8. In terms of rigor and mathematical practices, a perfect score again in grades 6 through 8. And in terms of usability, not a perfect score, but next to a perfect score, 37 out of 38 in grades 6, 7, and 8. So that tells us that not only do our stakeholders agree that this is the best resource, but an independent agency also agrees that this is the best curriculum resource for middle school math out there that is available for our consumption. To turn over to the more quantitative results, which is included in the slide deck, in terms of the lessons, differentiation was something that was highlighted by those teachers who field tested it or experienced it as being one of the strengths of this resource. The scaffolding is embedded so that all learners will have access to benefit from these lessons. Of course, we recognize that the rigor, as measured by Ed Reports, is heightened in Open Up Resources, but they have built-in scaffolds so that all students will be able to get a true understanding or better conceptual understanding of the mathematical practice. resources.
I think lots of times we think of in middle school math that once you get to 6+ or 7+, that's the differentiation. Is there differentiation within 6+ and 7+?
Yes. So the standards within 6+ and 7+ are made up of a combination of current grade level standards. So we have to mix and match some of the units and modules to make that happen. So from that aspect, yes. But from within the actual module and unit itself, all of those modules for Open Up resources have been designed using Universal Design for Learning pedagogical strategies, and so ensuring that all students have the access, but also the differentiation to be able to extend their learning, it's all built in to the curriculum for all of our students.
Great.
So all of our students will be challenged by this curriculum resource. In terms of resources and supports, what we have found from the feedback from the teachers is that the resource aligns well with the standards and the shifts, in which has been an emphasis of our district over the past couple of years. It also includes practice problems that encourage student engagement and scaffolding for struggling learners. What I've learned when I was talking with some of the references that the vendors listed is that there is a heightened level of student discourse when they use this resource. So when you walk into a classroom, you hear students discussing the math. It's not just, what did you get for number 2? How did you score on this test? It's more of, okay, talk to me about the Pythagorean theorem and why I'm moving into beyond my comfort zone when I start talking about. But they're having a deeper, richer discourse on the mathematical concepts that are being covered in the classroom. And finally, it aligns well with the MVP that we are using in our high school mathematics courses. We used it for Math 1 this year, and we will be piloting it. Well, not piloting it, we'll be pushing forward with Math 2 and Math 3 next year. So we have found that students who will have the experience with Open Up will be better equipped to be successful when they move into the high school mathematics courses as well, based on the alignment between Open Up and the MVP.
Can you remind us what MVP is?
Mathematics Vision Project is the company name of the high school curriculum solution that we procured last year for Math 1. We are getting ready next year to begin to scale that up to Math 2. We've had a 3-year approach. We've given high schools, based upon their level of readiness, choice on whether they wanted to extend that to Math 3 or not. And we have about 50% of our high schools taking advantage of that next year, which is a great sign.
So that was one of the key things, that we wanted a resource that would complement the high school resource as well. And we found that in Open Up.
Yeah, and that's really important to the teacher who's in 8th grade teaching a Math 1 course. We've just asked them to make a huge leap and shift. They want something that aligns to that framework they bought in, so that's great news.
Is that by Open Up as well, or MVP?
No, it's a separate company. Separate company.
But both are standards aligned and speak well to the shifts, which means that they would complement each other. Since they're
and our 4 Cs. It really puts students in positions to be problem solvers every day. And it's really based in developing strong conceptual understanding and not just learning the application of math. So I feel really good about the strategic plan alignment as well.
So there are some things that we need to consider, and these were illuminated as I spoke with district leaders in a couple of other districts that are using this program. First, I spoke with some leaders in Buncombe County, which is here locally in North Carolina, but also had an opportunity to speak with school leaders out in the state of Washington, Evergreen Public Schools. And what they shared was that professional learning is key. I think that professional learning we know is key in everything, particularly in this, because this is going to be a paradigm shift for a lot of our math teachers. They're used to being the sage on the stage. We might have our own mathematical experiences where we can remember the teacher standing at the chalkboard or the overhead or the new camera. I don't know what it's called now, but really they do all of the talking. So they need to receive this professional learning early, and they need to receive it often so that they can better understand the mathematical practices, the instructional practices that it's going to take to move their students to the next level. and also to build that support system within themselves, because all of our middle school math teachers are going to be using this resource. So this allows us to heighten the strength of the PLT at the building and then at the district level as well.
And in fairness to our teachers, the curriculum that we've previously provided them in mathematics at the middle school level has pushed them in that position to be a sage on the stage. I think it's important for us to be fair in that what the curriculum is asking teachers to do. This is just asking them to do things differently and release them to be more of a facilitator. Still a very critical part of the work, but the student discourse is where a lot of that conversation moves towards.
So in terms of resources, we heard from the field that it is a need that students are provided workbooks each year so that they can best use or move themselves forward with this Open Up resource, and also more opportunities for enrichment, which I think you were speaking to as well. So we want to look at what Open Up is providing us and still ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. And then finally, time. These lessons within Open Up are for more of the 50 to 60-minute class periods. We recognize that not all of our middle schools have that time block within their schedule. So this, of course, will lead us to have further discussions on the middle school schedule, particularly what the EL or the ELA math block, ELA block looks like, as well as the math block as well, in terms of length of time and what that looks like. All right, so our next steps, you'll see us again next week. We're going to talk to you about our contract regarding the professional learning piece next week. And pending your approval, we hope to have 2 days of face-to-face professional learning for math teachers in grades 6, 7, and 8, beginning this spring and running through the summer, as Brian highlighted. Again, we're going to start this early on. We hope to start this early, and it's not a hope, it's pending your approval. We want to start this in early May. So that we can meet the needs of all of our teachers. Another thing that Open Up stated was it's best for the teachers to receive this professional learning during the summertime, before they go out for the summer, so that they can spend the summertime really delving deeper into what the resource provides, really planning planning how they want to implement this moving forward. So we're going to ensure that all teachers have an opportunity to receive that training before they track out or go home for summer break. Yes, ma'am.
I asked this question with EL, so I'll ask it with this. Do you have a plan for all those teachers that we're going to hire over the summer who are not going to get the training because they're not going to get hired until July and August?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, like we're offering extended sessions even throughout into the beginning of the school year.
So they can still have access to that. It's extremely important to the success of the implementation.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Yes, so we have planned that we'll have another training session during the teacher work days in August when traditional comes back, and we will have an additional training session in early September as well. Because we recognize certain schools start without being fully staffed, and so we have that time built in. And all of our sessions will be open up to, for lack of a better term, Open Up resources. They're going to be opened up to all of our teachers so that anyone can plug in and get that opportunity to receive the professional learning throughout the summer.
So that's AIG teachers, ESL supports, special education teachers. We want to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language and getting developed on this new curriculum.
And to extend that, we also have 2 days set aside to work with our principals and other instructional leaders in the building so that they can get a true understanding of what this resource looks like. We will, of course, did I see a hand? Mr. Fletcher? Yes, sir.
Go ahead and finish.
So
You were getting ready to land.
We are. We're getting close to it.
And so he wants to do that.
We're going to update Canvas, which is our learning management system, with this new curriculum content so that our teachers and our students can access it digitally as well. And then we're going to build in support for our principals and key school-based stakeholders through the leadership team, through our instructional leadership team that meets up to 6 times per year to help galvanize their learning and understanding of the resource. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Your emphasis on professional development, the provider's emphasis on professional development is understood. In prior state budgets, we've had the flexibility of using textbook money to help teachers know how to use the textbook effectively. The state has recently removed that flexibility for future budgets. So how will we need to resource professional development as we move forward?
Yeah, so great question. I'm very concerned about the loss of that flexibility to utilize curriculum dollars for professional development. It is going to be a game changer a year out in our district. We have financially planned for this core curriculum over 2 years ago, where we had an opportunity to not just have flexibility with utilizing these dollars for PD, but we are also able to use those dollars to roll over in the event that we didn't pay for them, utilize them in a current fiscal year. When we were developing our strategy and identifying the needs, we didn't spend that year up to 50% of our curriculum budget to position this school system to be able to do what we've done over the last 2 years. We've lost that flexibility as well. We feel comfortable that we are in a good position to execute this well, but we know that there's other needs. When you look at what we will do for our K-2 English Language Arts solution, when we look at what we may want to do for our AIG students and teachers, when we want to look at what high school English looks like and those core complex texts, those are the areas that I'm top of mind thinking about. How are we going to provide professional development to those particular teachers? Within our current budget, I'm going to be honest with you, we can't do it.
We need you to articulate what the need is.
Sure.
So we can go to Jones Street and make sure the folks on Jones Street understand what this simple change in the budget, how it actually impacts learning.
Yep.
And so please give us the tools to go to Jones Street and to help them come to understand that a textbook, without knowing how to use it, is a piece of paper.
Thank you for that request.
So I appreciate the emphasis on professional development, and I appreciate the trying to bring multiple users at all levels in the process. I'm always a little cautious when I hear get rid of the sage on the stage, because often that's also getting rid of the sage. I want to get rid of the stage because that's bad for instruction. But we've got a lot of sages out there, and sages aren't just those great people that sit there and, I'm the almighty one that needs to transfer, right? We've got a lot of sages with a lot of deep experience, a lot of deep strategies. There is no one-size-fits-all. Sometimes in professional development, things can kind of get rolled out as you got to do it this way. Not even always in the professional development, but sometimes in the administrative evaluation, when the principal goes and checks, are you doing it this way? Right? Even thinking about objectives have turned into, are your objectives written on the board? If not, you get scored down. That's bad evaluation. It's a bad use of objectives. So I guess my question is, how are we ensuring that our sages stay sages and their rich experience becomes part of this rollout? Because I've seen equally problematic student-centered learning that is without the sage,
Right.
And it becomes really pretty low level. And so the stage is a problem, and minus the sage is the problem. So I'd just love to hear a little bit more. Where's the breathing room, the flexibility, the creativity that hope gets infused into this process?
So one, and that's why I tried to emphasize throughout the presentation that our curriculum, to no fault of any teacher in our district, our curriculum has led teachers to being more of a sage on the stage than probably they've needed to. But that's still an important part of the skill and art of teaching. Teachers need to be out in front of students, interacting with them, and open up resources. This particular math curriculum isn't going to remove them from that process, and it will still value them as the expert. It focuses on three things. Does the work focus on the major work of the grade? Does it help build upon key mathematical concepts to build coherence? And is it rigorous? And not just from a procedural fluency aspect, but from an application standpoint as well. And right now, our current curriculum is teaching a concept where most of our 500 middle school math teachers had to develop what that stage looks like. Right? They're developing their own PowerPoints. They're developing how to present that information. And this particular takes that off off of their plate if they so choose, but puts them in a situation where the students are now more balanced from not just having to do 30 math problems after a teacher may have presented a particular math concept. They may be grappling with a real-world scenario that's happening in our community and engaging around that, but it's very structured. My guess, based upon the feedback that we've already received from teachers, is that I will actually elevate them to do more creative things based upon their time, not just being always front and center of the classroom, compensating for what they didn't have already in the curriculum.
Well, I hope we don't do lots of PowerPoints. And I hope it's very adaptable, because like I say, I just peer reviewed some folks where they were using somebody else's resources. And so if you don't, as a teacher, right, if I don't have a mechanism to take whatever the resources are and make them my own and put my flavor onto it, then I tend to click through somebody else's information, and I don't.
You don't own it.
So that's all part of the professional development. So I just want to keep emphasizing and pushing that we build the internal capacity and the opportunity for creativity, because that's where learning actually takes place.
Agreed. Point well taken.
I have a quick question on with the Facebook hearing going on now. What are we doing to protect student data, and given that these are open systems and such broad systems, how are we continuing to, I hope, protect student data?
I'm going to let Marla take that one.
Yeah. So most of these open systems don't have a digital component. So most of it is teacher resources that are used with students, but student data is not being placed in them. So other than Canvas, which is where all of our core curriculum reside, we do have a data agreement in place with Canvas. So we're good.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Really, you should be working on the teacher data.
Okay, about our teacher data.
Because that's what data we're
Same.
our kids
Same
on it.
thing, okay.
Thank you.
Our kids are this. Teacher. Oh, they're
I just want to say thank you. I mean, I'm just a pharmacist, so I don't want to say all of this, but I am really excited by your excitement. So thank you for all of you on the team.
Thank you. Thanks for your support. It means a lot.
Anyone else? I think Ms. Cat, you heard folks sum it up. Mr. Fletcher gave you a round of applause earlier. So we do appreciate that, especially the continuity that our students and teachers will be able to see.
Thank you. It really means a lot. We look forward to seeing you next week, bringing forth the contract for the professional development.
Oh, yeah, wrap that on up, Mr. Kingsley.
Good.
First comes information, next comes contract.
Yeah, good.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yes, you stay.
It'll take more than 5 days.
So joining you is
I may be on the island.
Chrisley, or you're
here.
okay. All right.
It's all right. That's okay. So we don't have a presentation per se, but if you have an opportunity to look at the précis, I'm really excited to announce our school system's ability to be very targeted and strategic with the new resources that our state superintendent has provided all school systems across the state of North Carolina in the amount of $200 for every K through 3 teacher that you have in your school system. When the initial press release went off regarding this, it really was kind of taken that money was going to be put directly into the paychecks of all of those teachers, and we've had to kind of work with staff and our schools and our teachers as well as our finance department, because along with that announcement came a very quick turnaround time on what our district and every other district's solution, I think, was probably, 2 weeks? Literally 2 weeks that we had to make a decision on behalf of 114 of our elementary schools on what we were going to do. So it was an opportunity for us to do 2 things. One, listen to the feedback that we've been getting from our elementary schools all year long and provide them a proposal to then go back and take to their teachers that was responsive to their feedback and listen to hear what we've got. And that's what we did. Our department put together a proposal that we've been hearing from our school principals and teachers all year long, that we've just changed the game this year in 3rd grade quite significantly by providing all of our 3rd grade teachers a new curriculum, EL education. The comprehensive nature of that curriculum and the complexity of the text, our schools have been really crying in a positive way that you've just created a huge jump from what the 2nd grade experience looks like to what they're now encountering in 3rd grade. And 3rd grade proficiency, as we all know, doesn't start in 3rd grade. It starts at birth. And so our schools have been really asking of how we can balance out and provide not just second grade, but K2, all of the texts that they need to align to that particular area and supplement what they're getting with Letterland to be able to set our students up for success. So our proposal was this, that we can be very targeted when we look at the amount of money that we were getting with all of our K3 teachers. It's just under $500,000. And looking at that in a disparate form is not much strategy that we can do to put that and do something significant. But looking at $500,000, we could not only provide all of our second grade classrooms with the complex text, the set of complex text for every one of their second grade students, but we were also able to be equally responsive to listening to what their third grade teacher said, that we also want the supplemental books that go along with the EL curriculum. It's not a required text, but when we have an AIG student or we have a struggling student, that we wanted the books that the company recommends to be able to extend that learning or scaffold that learning, and that's exactly what we have been able to do. Through this particular proposal, we've received a tremendous amount of excitement from our elementary school principals that they're actually, sometimes I get a little worrisome when an elementary principal hits reply all to every one of the 114 elementary school principals about how they feel about this. But it was overwhelming excitement. And the few that had questions, it was more about, I still need us to focus on the third grade supplemental text. And with this money and partnering with our finance department, we were able to drive down pricing and be able to accomplish both. And so that's what I'm here to present to you today. Again, the timeline was very, very quick. I think if it was longer, we could take a very different approach on this journey, but I feel really confident that we've been responsive to our schools, but also responsive to the goals of our strategic plan and staying really focused on complex text and standards in the 4 Cs. So I'm happy to entertain any questions that you may have regarding this, but I think we've done something really cool with these dollars in a short amount of time.
Questions?
So you'll have enough, not for just today, but for next year with some of our class size having more second grade classrooms and third grade classrooms.
Yes, ma'am. And I've also promised to invest academics dollars to invest in not just giving them the second grade resources, but to provide them the PD to support their teachers on how to utilize them. Any other questions?
That's a great gift.
That's a great gift, yeah.
Much better than
Yes,
a few peanuts for each teacher.
yes.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of when we work together, we can do more than little bits by individuals.
Absolutely. Appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being the bearer of
See you
good
next
news.
week.
Good news.
You bet.
Oh, these supplemental texts are awesome. This is supplemental class? Thank you. Hello there.
How you guys doing, right? Feels like I've been here, and I haven't been here in a while.
Yes. It always feels like you're here.
I wish I could say I was on vacation.
Not yet.
You are.
So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are, as promised, we are coming back a little earlier than we normally do to talk about how we are going to work to get some additional feedback prior to the development of Draft 1 that includes not only the opportunity for the board to provide feedback on what the major areas are that we're looking at in the next year's iteration of the enrollment plan, but also how we might involve some stakeholder groups in the community to get additional feedback that helps us inform how we build Draft 1. That's been a question that has come up a number of times, and so we're here today to talk a little bit about that initial discussion, what the priorities are, and an option that we've identified for moving forward to begin to get some stakeholder feedback in the community prior to the building of Draft 1. And I'm going to turn it over to Glenn.
So, I mean, can you believe it's 2019, 2020 that we're looking at already?
Yes.
It's pretty crazy when you look at that. So what staff is here to do is to begin discussing the 2019-2020 enrollment plan. Our goal for today is to just provide some talking points, solicit feedback from the board so that we can start to look at planning a Draft 1. So just to review real quick, we've got some new schools opening. There's going to be 4, 2 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high. Those are Southeast Raleigh Elementary. Southeast Raleigh Elementary is going to be a traditional school with a capacity of 426. It'll open at pre-K through 5. This base attendance area has already been established in the 18-19 enrollment plan. So we really don't have much to discuss about this school at this time. Question?
I would like to raise the issue of the middle school and high school alignment for what we've already discussed.
You'd like for us to look at what feeder patterns will happen for that elementary school? Yep.
It's a very intentional school, so if we could make sure that cohort of students have some alignment at middle and high school.
We'll add that to our list of things for draft 1.
Thank you.
And while we're there, groundbreaking tomorrow morning at 10.
Yes.
Yes. I'm there.
I didn't get one.
You are welcome to come. I think you should. You might, maybe it's a great idea for you to feel good about, oh, the doors are opening, and not just the enrollment piece of it.
All right, so Southeast Raleigh Elementary. Now we're going to go ahead.
Before you leave Southeast Raleigh Elementary, I don't know if this is the appropriate, with regard to the alignment piece and the feeder pattern piece and the middles. Obviously, the only 2 middles in that area would be Carnage and Ligon, which would probably be tight, somewhat tight at best. One of the next closest would be the Young Men's and Young Women's Leadership Academy, so probably also pretty much in the area. And so in thinking about that, at what point will we, or have we done a sort of report on where the leadership academies are, because they're in what year?
Location, or you're talking about
Just
like
how they're doing.
capacity and
Capacity,
okay,
efficiency,
all right.
programming,
Okay.
sort of piece. I don't know if that would, it's probably not here, but if we're thinking if the thought that they might be part of or could be part of some sort of feeder pattern, then also might help to have some, or some sense of how they might fit into a possible.
Right. So I think that's a good topic for a future meeting, like a student achievement committee, so that you can see how we are carrying the priorities and the sort of unique features and intentionality of how we're building Southeast Raleigh Elementary School into the feeder patterns, and then how we involve those schools in creating the structures that support those students. I think that's more of a programmatic thing, but we do need to identify first what those feeder patterns look like, and then, and I think that would also be a good time to bring you sort of a more concrete model of what Southeast Raleigh Elementary is going to look like, because that committee's continued to meet as well. But we'll talk about that.
Okay. All right, so Parkside Elementary, we haven't determined which calendar this school would open on. We've given you the capacities of the traditional, if it opened traditional and year-round there. It's planning to open grades K-5. And then we've got the potential impact area. These are very similar to the slides we've shared back in January, so if it looks familiar, it's basically the same information. We'll talk a little bit more on site about Parkside and the next school, our middle school that we're opening, which is Alston Ridge Middle School. Again, the calendar, either traditional or multi-track year-round, and we give the capacities there, opening grades 6 through 8. And look at the potential impact schools.
So many.
Well, middle schools cover a larger area, and depending on the calendar, which is going to get into our next conversation soon, depending on the type of calendar that you choose to open this school at, will determine how much of an impact net needs to be spread. Obviously, if it's traditional, we're going to need to increase the impact area, because if we need the seats, you're going to need to impact more schools in order to accommodate all of the students.
That's 2 traditional elementaries, 2 year-round elementaries, correct, in that impact list?
Yeah, when you look at that, yeah, and that's another question that we have in this slide.
Slide 8's coming up.
Yeah. We were thinking ahead.
Thank you.
All right, Green Level. So Green Level is a traditional, obviously, high school with a capacity of 2266. And we're looking at, this came up in the 18-19 enrollment plan. We opened South Garner at 9 and 10, but there was a possible discussion of opening at 9-11. And here, this will be the same discussion we'll have with Green Level. Due to the impact of the crowding at Panther Creek, would you want to consider opening it as 9 through 11? And Green Hope as well. Okay.
We currently have overflow students from Panther Creek at Apex at the Green Level campus?
That's correct.
Okay.
And others who will
And at
be
Green Hope.
reassigned.
There are like 380
Well,
of them at Green Hope.
Okay. Right, so here's slide 8, one we wanted to talk about. So Parkside and Alston Ridge, these two are very close to each other in proximity. And they're going to be impacting each other because Parkside will most likely feed to Alston Ridge Middle School, looking at proximity. Depending on the calendars of the schools, we'll have to look at different scenarios. But just due to the proximity of these schools, the calendars that they will open on will impact other schools in the area. And then it goes to, remember the last year's discussions, we talked about how many families were going from year-round to a traditional calendar school. Well, either way you open this school, it's going to have the same discussions because there will be schools, such as Carpenter and Alston Ridge Elementary, are in the projected base attendance area for Parkside. Those are year-round schools. So if it opens as a traditional, those will be year-round kids going to a traditional. Such as Cedar Fork, which is right next to where the site is. That's a traditional. So if it opens as year-round, you're going to get that mismatched calendar for families. So that will be something that we'll have to discuss as the enrollment plan cycles through from draft 1 to the final draft. Yeah, and some of it we just don't have a choice. I mean, because it's just the location of the schools and where they are. But then again, looking
It's appropriate
at
to recognize that year-round traditional, i.e. year-round elementary, traditional middle, traditional high, is probably less strain on families than traditional elementary, year-round middle, traditional high. So I think it's worthwhile to recognize that it's not completely even when looking at juggling calendars.
I think it's clear from our last enrollment plan that there's a greater concern, consternation that comes even from the parents when you go traditional year-round back to traditional. So,
Understandable.
But I would hope to see a draft or strategy or discussion that would honor the folks who've been in the year-round program and how might that middle school be used without having to create all the calendar conversion, the calendar confusion. How many elementary schools are necessary to fill the multi-track year-round school? That alignment of feeder pattern is a discussion that we tried to unwind in Holly Springs area last year, and it was too big an issue to tackle in one year, and particularly when we started tackling it. Here, we can get in front of that curve. A challenge for the calendar confusion is for us to be very precise and deliberate about what the feeder patterns are, and to, as best we can over time, respect alignment K-8 within a calendar. And that is not a practice that we had for several years. We kind of ignored calendar when we opened a school. And that created a lot of the tension that we have now. So the other thing I would say is that as we make a choice about that, we're looking at an extra 300 seats at middle school in an area that is just slammed with children moving into that age group. So it'll be a good discussion, I'm sure.
And seeing that K-8 alignment for siblings sometimes doesn't give the choice that of the calendar that is wanted by families. I think that's very hard because there are seats at one school and there are not seats at a school where the calendar might be preferred. I think I'm glad that we are reaching out to families before draft 1 comes out.
I will say that at a Board Advisory Council meeting, we had discussion about this, but Alston Ridge would not probably impact most folks in my district in the schools that I represent. However, the idea was put on the table, well, if you open it as a grade 6 school, then you're not causing anyone to go, you're not impacting Mills Park Middle. I'm not describing it properly. We can eliminate some confusion by considering opening it over a longer time.
Yeah.
But that's part of the discussion we'll have as we move forward.
And I think a big takeaway is to just, these are all really good ideas and decisions that need to be made, but just we need to understand that the decisions we make potentially impact more and more students as we try to look at making additional changes like these. So I just wanted to throw that out there. All right?
I would be interested in what that might look like.
Well, we can definitely run scenarios
What
as we start to get into it.
What if we could create it so that you want year-round, and it's a great opportunity, but you want traditional, that it's a bigger area, but that we could provide it. So families could, in fact, be on a year-round calendar or get out of a year-round calendar, because that's what we see at appeals all the time.
Any other feedback? Okay. All right, so the K-3 class size legislation. This is still a concern for the majority of our Wake County schools, especially at the elementary level. Staff will continue to do what they can to support schools through this as we work towards a several-year plan for meeting the 18, 16, 17, 17 mandate. There are procedures in places at schools. They're able to self-report any enrollment concerns that they have. So we've got information out to schools so that they can let us know, hey, we're having some issues, we've got some concerns, look at this, and then staff will look at ways to find support for them. And it's going to be a continued discussion, and review is necessary. I know last year we had like that top 25 schools, and you'll see the remnants of that in one of these slides. But we'll continue to review it again. As enrollment changes, as we grow, there will be some new schools who have new issues. So we'll continue to bring you up to speed on that information as well.
I think I would say that while the K-3 implementation plan that you'll vote on this evening is about implementing in existing schools with the existing projected enrollments and sort of waterfalling what happens short-term versus long-term, there is a piece that is within that plan that also indicates that to some extent the enrollment plan can provide support for how we implement the K-3 class size legislation. So it's like a partner in how that happens, whether it is the opening of a new school or other reassignments that can support the changes that need to be made in order to successfully implement K-3. And I think that's important to note because in both of these cases, whether it is the discussion about Parkside and Alston Ridge, in order to align some calendars and make some decisions that protect and advance the interests of families who want multi-track year-round, address crowding concerns. You've got some pressure that happens on the other side in terms of either proximity or stability and the size of a draw area. But then which might increase the number of students impacted. Well, it would increase the number of students impacted. And then implementing through the enrollment plan changes that support needs for K-3 class size legislation increase the impact of the number of students impacted as well if you're not just looking at new schools that are opening.
Ms. Cash regularly reminds us, though, we need to more effectively use empty seats.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yep.
Thanks.
And that's going to require assignment issues. Not nice, but
It's the real some in my area.
All right, so the next slide talks about operational efficiency. These are the CAT schools for 18-19. The schools in green are schools that potentially could be impacted by a new school opening in 2019-2020. The other schools, we do have a cap in place. They are assigning students to overflow once they reach their cap number. But we'll need to continue to possibly look at some of these other schools as well. So not just the schools that are opening, but do we need to look at some of these other schools that are in black on this list to say, hey, can we do anything to help relieve the crowding at these schools? And getting back to the K-3 class size legislation, these were some of the schools that didn't make or did make the list, but we still have concerns about the crowding due to the K-3 class size legislation.
So these are schools that were not on the capped list, but they're like on a high watch list.
So the greens are capped.
Everything on the previous slide is.
These are all
Slide 10, everything's
Is
covered.
Combs not capped?
Yeah, all of those are capped.
Oh, all of them have nothing to do with color.
Yeah, the green are just schools that are impacted by new schools opening.
Okay, I'm sorry.
1920.
Perfect.
That's right.
Okay.
Those in black, we need to figure out what to do with them.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the feedback portion. So we're planning to come to your BAC meetings in April and May and to receive feedback prior to creating Draft 1. We heard you loud and clear. You wanted the public to be have more of a voice in before we plan for Draft 1, and that's what our plan is to do, is to go to the BAC meetings. But the question is so what format should we use to collect feedback at the BAC meetings? Would it be, we present information to parents and then have the parents at the BAC go out and solicit information to other parents? Could it be through surveys? There's lots of different ways we could do that. Do you have any suggestions or input as to how you would like that feedback collected?
Can it be a yes and? I mean, I think getting as many different kinds of feedback might be beneficial because I think the more people we can reach, the better.
What would we be asking them?
Yeah, what's the
We'll get into that on the next slide.
Next question. I'm answering this question.
Well, this one is actually the how, not the how many.
Yes.
I see her. I thought you were going to add something. I was like, okay. Okay, let's start.
I want the and I want as much feedback as we possibly can get. And the fact that, because I've been telling, I've lost count of the families, that they would have an opportunity through a survey to voice their opinion. And I think it's critical that we design a survey that allows parents who cannot come to a back meeting to have the same voice. I'm a little concerned about if it's at a back meeting, not all of our back representatives are highly skilled in being able to get that message out. They're not communication experts to the school. They can talk to their PTAs, and get that sort of feedback. But and the time of day. Like mine's scheduled for midday on a topic like this. I don't want it. I might actually prefer that it's on a Saturday or a Sunday, on a weekend, on a time when, because I want families to be able to have their voice heard. I'm very cognizant of we're not going to be able to satisfy and give everyone what they want, but I think they have to have, and it's our responsibility to make it as easy as possible for them to hear, for their voices to be heard.
So to question one, I hear you saying survey, and then we. Okay.
As one way.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. That's what was my question. Let's see to answer.
My concern is what will those questions be that aren't answered, not in my backyard? And that to me is the challenge of a survey, is getting quality input on a system plan. And so I don't know how to solve that gap, but that's it's very easy to turn into so long as it doesn't affect me, you can do whatever you want, which is not what. I don't think that's the input we would be asking for.
Not as useful.
That's what I was saying, like question 2 ought to be question 1, determining what information you're looking for first. Then you might determine what is the tool, be it survey or something else. What information are we trying to get first?
We have several hands. Christine, Jenna.
Well, I see feedback as just for parents. Are we not looking for feedback from the community as far as what their financing can handle as far as the whole community? Or we're only looking for what parents want for their student assignment of their child?
I think that's open to you as the board. If you want us to widen that net to community members, we could certainly reach out to whoever you'd like. I think we initially thought parents, because
Yeah, I would just say I know we have a lot of potential or future parents that are looking at these things. Because we hear from families, this decision was made, but you didn't look at Rising K or Rising 6 in order to see the impact. So I think if we can engage those families who are looking at Wake County Public Schools for their incoming students, I think that would show that we value their input as well.
But you were asking a different question.
My concern is that if they say to us, we don't want to be reassigned, but we want to look at vacant seats because the community as a whole can't handle funding more schools all the time, and they're going to say you never listen to us. So there's a whole community out there that I want to hear from because they will impact, I think, our student assignment for the better of the funding. And I don't know how to do that. I'm just worried that we're leaving that out. I'm thinking about how we could do that.
So processing what type of a survey, and we'll show you some of the ideas on the next slide, in terms of the information we might gather from those families that are actually going to be impacted by it. But I'm trying to figure out if there's a modified version that might be for citizens, stakeholder groups that are in the community that they may or may not have children in our schools at this point, whether it's by choice or because they don't have children in our schools, whichever the case may be, and what drives their decision making or what they feel priorities should be as we create seats and or fill those seats.
And that might be a big order to fill, but I think
I'm just trying to say it out loud.
Yeah.
The challenge in reaching survey takers who are not part of the WCPSS family, meaning have students, is it's almost has to be an open forum type of link. And then it becomes challenging. As a matter of fact, what you're doing is you're starting to sort of, if I understand your question, you're starting to get closer almost to a bond referendum kind of survey as opposed to an assignment survey. Two different.
Might be very related.
Touch on both.
Yeah. There's
The advantage of the survey of families is you know who they are and how much you want to differentiate the responses. In other words, like where they go to school now, by grade level. This depends upon how much time and effort and money you want put into the survey. And you can start tying back their responses to their particular situation. But it's a pretty wide open, it's a pretty blank canvas right now. You'll see here in a moment some of the questions we're discussing, most of them built upon the idea that the higher level you keep the questions, the better, the more usable the information for you. The deeper you get into the weeds, the more you get. To Mr. Fletcher's point, I don't care as long as you don't do it to me. So you can't really ask, do you want me to keep your schedule? That's not a particularly terribly good question to work with. But if I ask you, of these areas, what are your priorities and what are your preferences? Then you can begin to understand by community whether there is a preference for a type of calendar in a community or whether there is a preference for close to school no matter what, or those types of things, which obviously can help you in guiding decisions that you make.
Are there a lot of differences in answers that we're going to find other than what we're looking for is calendar? Everybody's going to say close to school, don't move me. It doesn't take a survey to find out.
I'm sure you will find
If they don't like the school near them, they're on.
I don't like the school near me.
I see your hand, Mr. Sutton. I still have Ms. Kushner. Dr. Moore.
I was going to ask quickly, are we going to use the Envision format platform again? And what did we learn last time that we might change about how we use Envision?
We would use the Envision format once we get to the part of the process where we have a plan on the table. In the early survey work, it would probably be more of like your straight traditional survey format.
So the survey idea has value at multiple levels depending on how we do the survey. I mean, clearly we want feedback on my specific case. We're not trying to ignore that, but we're asking, I think, a deeper question than that, not just my specific case. And so that's where we have to be careful on the survey is what questions we ask and how we ask it. But I think we need something beyond survey, and I think we need something a little bit more like, the role play model like you guys put together on budget a couple years ago to have some case study exercises. Because survey, right, I mean, we all want grandma apple pie and great math instruction, right? Okay. There's lots of stuff I can say on a survey, but what we have to do is we have to balance all kinds of competing factors. If we want all schools to start after 8:30, right? Or before 8:30. We don't want any schools starting later than that. That'd be great, right? But that's going to cost, what, $70 million-ish if we change our transportation to do that. And so are there some scenario kinds of things that we can put together? And I'm not sure that works well in a survey setting, and that's where the BAC setting, I think, maybe would have some better value. If we could put together a few scenarios, and what we need is people to get a little bit disconnected from my situation to thinking about, we got a system that has to be operated. That means if I make this decision here, it's going to in fact impact this decision here. It'd be great to bring in some other community members. I know that happens in some BACs. I often get some community members in my BAC, but it strikes me a BAC would be a better format to have some of that scenario conversation on, which is, it's not that I don't care about you, but in this conversation, I don't care about you. I want you to think in the bigger context.
Yeah, I like that.
And we're not going to get that out of a survey. So that's, I think, the value that we need
That's a value.
to move forward. The survey is useful, but if we're really going to make progress on some of these tougher decisions, I think we've got to have some of these role-played scenarios.
Mr. Sutton.
So I think for BAC 4, when you think about Southeast Raleigh Elementary and that sort of thing, I think, and also thinking about your audience, that's going to be principals in that area and PTA representatives. One question that might come up, or one information that we would want to get is, as I've raised in terms of student achievement and how much we're going to continue to pursue student achievement as a pillar in the plan. And I think that's a question that's going to go off in the minds of some, because you've got some of the elementary support model schools in that area, and now another elementary opening up. So where is as we saw with Rogers Lane, we knew it was going to kind of open up with that same sort of performance composite. We didn't call it an elementary support school, though, or put it sort of in that basket. So there are going to be some that are going to, I think, have sort of the same thinking or question about that, given what we might anticipate composite being for Southeast Raleigh Elementary as we open that up. Another question, I think, was an information that would be good to either get from them or think about, being that we're opening Southeast Raleigh Elementary with the enhanced focus on early childhood education, what we will be tracking from that school sort of in the beginning, assuming that if we see some success, will we see then further development or proliferation of this model in other elementary schools, particularly in that area, with the focus on early childhood, or enhance, I guess, early childhood education and focus and that sort of thing. So
The base pre-K.
yeah. So I would think some of that thinking, those questions and information, it might be good to get from those in that particularly in my BAC in my area, or at least thinking along some of those lines.
So just one question that I have for the board on the feedback topic is whether the board is looking for, staff obviously getting some feedback, but staff actually putting together a pre-board review plan with options in it and getting feedback from the public before it ever comes to the board. No.
This first.
To the board before it goes. Got it.
Yes.
That is the promise that we made. I'm keeping that promise in this seat.
Got it.
Mr. Fletcher.
There were, if we think back to the most recent community survey that we did, there were structured questions that we asked people to respond to relative to the superintendent search. And we had staff and we had the community give us some, what is most important to you? Maybe we could phrase some questions like that and perhaps even tease some of these out. I think it would be important for us to assess diversity in different dimensions. Ethnic, racial, socioeconomic. Just to say I want a diverse school doesn't cover the waterfront. And I'm just suggesting that as a possibility of one of multiple questions. But perhaps that's a way for us to look at how folks would rank elements that we have to consider when we're opening a new school or dealing with seats that are distant from where the population is, which is a challenge. I can see that kind of thing, but a guided set of questions that actually are tied to issues that we have to deal with as we're structuring our new plan.
Some of the criticism we got with when we were doing our last student assignment plan was about current data, that we didn't really have current. And one of the things I'm really interested in is we have our 4 pillars for our student assignment. Does our community still want those 4? How do they feel about those 4? And is there, I actually asked my back at one of my last back meeting and got some feedback from them, but I don't feel like it was enough. I think it was too small of a group. So I would really like to know how our community feels, because that small group was very much in support of it, and I'd like to be able to stand on that.
So Mr. Simmons knows what I think is ideal, but it's a bit grandiose. And both Mr. Fletcher and Ms. Kushner will remember, because we did a work group together on this. I really liked the process that we used for our strategic plan. It allowed us to do surveys. It allowed us to do focus groups. Because for me, people will respond to a survey if you ask a high-level question that's not about me and my child, right? So that actually gives us baseline data without it removes the emotion. We actually just have data, just the facts is what you end up with when you ask high-level questions in a survey. So when I said this to Mrs. Simmons last year, his eyes did exactly what he's doing now. However, I still think we can do, my opinion, again, is still, I think that's the scale-down model we should use, because the more methodologies you use allow you to be able to sift through what's personal versus what's actually really rationally, what does our community believe, which gets to, quite frankly, what's the capacity our community has or appetite do we have for certain things, which I know, Mr. Simmons, I get my request is complicated, but I also think that if we used our BACs, and by BAC I don't mean just the regular people who come. There are BACs, we should be opening them up if we're going to talk about assignment, and that's on us, right? As board members, how we manage our own BACs. I don't think that onus is on at least my chair. So I think they could be a focus group, which means we ask the same questions to each group of people, which is far more organized than than you all doing randomized groups of people, which is what we did for the strategic plan. I think two things will happen. I think people will feel heard, and I also think it gives us the opportunity to hear very clearly to, hey, this group of answers came from actual parents. This came from prospective parents. This came from people who have children who are not in our school. And this came from community members who are stakeholders without children or any ideologies of children coming into our district. That has been most helpful to me also with our superintendent search, but it was also helpful in deciding kind of where I sat on our strategic plan too, was to be able to determine what people thought and from what perspective they were landed on. I'm happy to think about how we can scale that back, but I think I'm only reiterating because I feel like that's what I heard the folks around the table say, and it sounded nicer than me scaring Mr. Simmons with my idea.
It's not a question of complexity. You can do all sorts of things, and whether it's surveys or communication channels, there are plenty of those available. It's a question of how consuming that task becomes.
So, I mean, you already know my answer to this too, Mr. Simmons. I think it's one of the biggest things we do in this community, and so, but that's Monica's opinion.
I agree. I think one of the things that this could do is, it was noted on either the last policy committee or the previous one that some of our policy has a philosophy statement above and some of it doesn't. And our current student assignment policy doesn't have that philosophical statement. I've heard the healthy school statement from previous kind of as a philosophy that we followed, but this could help craft that philosophy and kind of show what we believe when it comes to assignment as far as putting it into policy, and it would be direct from the community.
I'm thinking about what happens in a BAC. So we've got a slide that shows some of the types of things that we might ask in a survey or in an activity to sort of force rank in terms of what's most important and least important, and that's not necessarily a comprehensive list. You see the red across there. Yes. So that we could get, as Mr. Fletcher had already said, that saying diversity of students might not get at exactly what it is that we're trying to ask, that it might need to be more specific or more nuanced. Maybe is a better word than that. So I'm also sensing a clear separation about what an activity or approach around how we engage an extended BAC group for feedback versus what may happen in a survey scenario. So, and I'm wondering if in a BAC, it might be important for the people who are in attendance to start with the policy, understand what the 4 pillars are, and then maybe do some scenarios and rankings around those pillars and how they push-pull against each other with the opening of a new school or with crowding or under-enrollment, the things that we actually wrestle with as we are creating the plan, and do it within the context of the pillars in the enrollment plan, and that sort of be the focus of an activity in a BAC. And then if we're going to do a survey with some forced choices that mirrors something around who are you, who are the people that are responding, and then how the variety of questions that we ask them provide us with information that we're needing to ask, and that broadens what that feedback looks like in the groups that are participating in that feedback.
So there's a reality of timing here that we got, right? Because our last BACs are going to be meeting within the next, 4 or 5 weeks.
We've got one Friday.
Yeah, kind of thing, right? So
I have one I don't think anybody can go to. I think you have one nobody can go to.
But my sense is if we would have this scenario thing that you just sort of roughly outlined, Kathy, which I agree with, I think some survey type questions, ideas would come out of those exercises. So I would rather not rush any kind of a broader survey, but I think doing that kind of exercise first would probably be a good precursor to developing the kind of broader information survey that we're talking about.
Well, we would have to get more people to come to our BAC. I mean, it would be up to us to try to
Ideally,
get as many
yes.
people as we can.
Like, I have one next Monday, but I would have to have a second one in May, which is fine. Because I think everybody would turn out for a second one if it was about student assignment. But it would be really important for us to get as many
I agree.
people, what we think are people that we would want to hear this.
Yes.
Am I, so what I proposed sounds like it would make sense. Okay, so then the question at this point will be, and we'll follow up with you about having it ready for Friday.
Wow.
It's coming on Friday. And what that can look like versus. We'd like to work within the framework that you already have in terms of the dates that you have established. We do not want to assume or impose anything different other than what you've already got. We know we've got one conflict with some BACs that are coming up in a couple of areas. We're Glenn's in Mexico, of all places. I don't know what he's thinking. Vacation.
I'd go to Mexico, too.
I don't blame you. You should go on vacation. Do not feel bad.
on
I appreciate that. And
You just have to come back.
Exactly. But you can get them.
so we just need to put our heads together and work through that real quick and get you something right away because we know we've got at least one BAC scheduled for this Friday.
So I was just about to say, so I think that's really the question which Roxy posed, and I think it's the question for 6, 3, and 8 is your thoughts, so staff either feels crunched or not on having another BAC.
I have 2 left, so I'm really not
okay, so you're
in that category.
I've got one later this month.
Okay.
I got one that Glenn can't come to tonight.
I'm the Friday one.
Yeah, we know. I'm looking at the list. I just need to make sure these first 3 don't have to crunch staff.
The next 13 days.
Yeah, I'm looking at.
I have one in May, so.
I think mine's in there.
I have one that he can't come to.
The real question is just the 3 of you who have them in the mix.
Yes. No, I'm.
You're good.
I'm good.
He can't come to mine, so I'm going to have to set a second.
So you would. That's what I'm asking.
I'm just
you would set a
set, I
second.
just set a chair.
Okay.
So so there's the one this Friday, and then the 2 that are Monday are the ones that
Right, and what I just did is ask those 3 people for clarification, and it sounds like they will, if not already scheduled, they will schedule one after.
Okay. All right.
Because it's really only these 3 I'm concerned
And if we
about.
need to do a second one, we'll gather together.
Yeah, I don't think you're hearing pushback that folks.
Yeah.
will.
All right. Appreciate it.
I'm pretty sure we can get people at an assignment BAC.
I don't think that.
I don't think we got to be worried. I just wanted to make clear for the 3 who have them immediately in front of us that staff don't have to feel like you're going to be working day and night
Appreciate that.
to get done by Friday. So at the very least, I think what I would say is you don't have to squeeze these 3 in. Bill and I have them later in the month, and so what I would say is you put your heads together and then just let us know kind of what's a real feasible timeline, and then we can start planning.
So, and you got a really high level next steps up there. You'll note you see the broad double month, whole season kind of combinations we have up there. We're still early in the process, so we're not fixed on anything. And I think even with the sort of step process that you've described around what BACs might provide that inform what we then may ask, there's time in there for that.
Teamwork. And you don't have to do it in 2 days.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for working on this. And as you all know, we are behind on going to the board meeting next door, so we will be quick in our transition.